Good afternoon. Oh, thank you. Audience participation. It's a great way to start off. I like that. It's so great to be here with you today. Thank you for coming. My name is Christy Clemens. I'm the Executive Director of Dialogue Initiatives here at Dartmouth. I am so excited to introduce our special guest today, author and journalist, Mónica Guzmán. I first learned about Mónica through reading about Braver Angels, a nonprofit working to bridge the partisan divide, where she is a senior fellow for public practice. After reading her book, I knew that Monica's approach of leading with curiosity would be a perfect fit for our dialogue work at Dartmouth. Monica's book is called I Never Thought of It That Way, How to Have Fearlessly Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times. It's a critically acclaimed guide to difficult conversations for people who find themselves at opposite ends of the political spectrum. Among her many professional activities, Mónica serves as host of the podcast A Braver Way and as founder and CEO of Reclaim Curiosity, an organization working to build a more curious world. She also serves as a board member for the Institute for Multipartisan Education, which recently kicked off a partnership with the Dialogue Project on a student leadership program. I invite you to learn more about this innovative new fellowship on our Dialogue Project website. Earlier today, Mónica led an enthusiastically received workshop for faculty and staff on listening with curiosity. She also met with students over lunch to delve deeper into the practices of curiosity and conversation, and we had a great conversation. The students asked amazing questions. In just a moment, Mónica will be joined in conversation with Dean Elizabeth Smith, founder of the Dialogue Project and director of our academic partnerships and faculty engagement. At the end of their conversation, you'll have a chance to ask questions of your own. I also hope you'll join us after the program just outside for a reception and book signing. If you haven't read Monica's book, we've got plenty of copies. My goal is to not take any of those books home, so please grab a book for a friend, and thank you for being here. Thanks for joining us, and without further ado, I would like to invite Mónica Guzmán and Dean Elizabeth Smith to come and have a conversation.
All right, here we are. Get settled in here with my microphone, my booklet of questions.
Yes.
Let's get our waters.
Waters,
ready.
do the little crack. Crack. There it is. Yep, nice.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming today. And Mónica, thank you for coming. We are so excited to have you here. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time and all day today, the bright spot in the day. So we'll just get started with some sort of getting to know you questions, and then we'll just dive right in. So I understand you're no stranger to New England.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the audience would love to hear about your connections with the area and maybe even to Dartmouth.
Right, so I'm Bowdoin College, class of 2005, so the snowy New England college thing is my thing too. Also, my father-in-law, mother-in-law, and sister-in-law are all Dartmouth grads. And my sister-in-law had a swimming record at the Dartmouth pool for something like 9 years. She no longer holds it, but she was proud of that. So I grew up New England from when I was, 8? Through moving to Bowdoin College, stayed here in New England, and then eventually went to the Pacific Northwest.
Well, welcome back.
Thank you.
So it's pretty clear that I think we all see the same problem out there, what appears to be just extreme polarization. Whether it's an inability to engage or a disinterest in engaging in constructive dialogue with people who have different perspectives. And so there are dialogue projects like the one at Dartmouth that are kind of popping up everywhere. And so I want to just ask you, what led you to write this book in terms of what was your intention and what did you hope people would get out of it?
Yeah, so we're talking about more than a book here. I just want to kind of say that out front. It's an obsession, it really is, and I find that it's better to just be candid about that right up front. There's two paths that I took to this book. One is professional and one is personal. The professional is that I've been a journalist my whole career. What brought me to journalism was this sense from when I was a little kid, looking around at the world going, man, a lot of the things that go wrong seem to go wrong because of misunderstandings. Which isn't to say that all conflict is misunderstanding, no. But it's wild how much conflict begins because somebody forgot to ask, what did you mean by that? And so I thought, well, maybe what I should do is try to help people understand each other. I know, I'll be a journalist. I'll tell stories as responsibly as I can about people to their community, to make more informed communities and the fourth estate and democracy and on and on and on. But sometime in the last who knows how long, I just started to see this distrust, this brokenness at the foundation of everything. And so that theory of change in my head just stopped adding up. I'm telling these stories as responsibly as I can, but people aren't trusting journalists. Journalists are among the least trusted people there are. And it appears to be that the media ecosystem itself is fracturing. People have their preferred outlets, and they just won't listen to anybody else. It felt like I needed to step outside of that and look at something a different way if it still mattered to me to help people understand each other. So then there's the personal bit, and that is, I'm from a politically divided family. Raise your hand if you're in a politically divided family. Okay, yeah. Not a unique experience. For us, it has a twist. We are Mexican immigrants. When I was 5 or 6 years old, we came up from Mexico. And when I was 17, my parents got naturalized as US citizens. So by the year 2000, they were automatic Republicans. I mean, the lawn signs appeared instantaneously, like, we're citizens, yes! Now we can say who we're gonna vote for and all of that. And I knew I was instantaneously a Democrat. And so, hilarity ensued. Lots of debates over what Glenn Beck said last night, over what I was reading in the New York Times. I go off to college and my dad's like, you're just being brainwashed by liberals. And I'm like, no, and there's all this stuff. The 2016 election, as it did for many people, really tested our family. And there was this angst, and I will be honest, I felt more angst about who they were voting for than they felt about who I was voting for, although they were still quite confounded about my political choices. Somehow, we managed to have the conversations. And it got to a point, and I remember just kind of realizing it one day, like, if I were my parents, I would have voted for Trump too. Yeah, it makes sense. I asked them so many questions about that, and they about me. We learned a lot from each other. Meanwhile, I'm looking around the country and I'm seeing not a lot of relationships survived that. And just in the last few months, it feels like there's been some new tears. So, yeah, it started to feel to me like these tools exist. They do. And I think we can do this, and I think we have to do this, because the more time we spend in the vicious cycle of judging each other more while engaging each other less, judging each other more, engaging each other less, what are our judgments based on? Not actually checking in with each other, probably more of our projections of who each other is and why we believe what we believe than the reality. And that can't hold. Like, this is my adopted country. Mexico's got more issues, let me tell you. We have something we need to preserve, and we have a very serious role in that. So there's on all the levels, spiritual, existential, technical, this is work that has to be done.
Totally agree. So I want to pose a question that's really a rhetorical question. Not necessarily for you to answer right now, but one that can kind of maybe serve as a through line to our conversation today. You wrote this book shortly after the first election of Trump, relatively speaking. And I think what we see is, one might say today that now after the second election, that the polarization has only increased. And so again, it's just kind of a rhetorical question to frame some of the work that you're doing, which is sort of, things have gotten worse. What's going on? How do we bring people back to the table? Do you still stand behind the techniques in your book? Is there something we need to tweak? Is there something we need to double down on? Do we need to take a different tack? Or do we simply need to motivate people to try harder?
Oh, great question.
So let's just
I'll leave it.
Let's let that hover.
I like it. Yes.
And as we sort of...
We're letting questions simmer. That's how you know it's going to be good. I like that. Okay.
Okay. So let's just leave that. And then let's talk about some of these techniques. And I also have some other questions sort of as follow-through about how would we use that in this situation kind of questions. So I just have to say that I had not even gotten out of the introduction to your book, and I was already underlining quotes. This isn't even a question. I mean, I just have to say this. Actually, there's a question, but I bet this has got to be one of your most quoted quotes. Curiosity is big and it is badass. Nothing busts through the walls we've built between us like a question so genuine and perceptive it cannot be denied. There's so much in that quote. And, you know, I feel like some of your techniques are aimed at exploring this, a question so genuine and perceptive. And just trying to think a little bit more about what does that mean to you? So genuine and perceptive, it cannot be denied. Because I think that's part of having these conversations.
Yes.
Is how do you ask that question?
So true. Genuine. A genuine question is geared toward finding information you don't have. It is not also geared toward leveling an accusation, making someone feel ashamed, pinning them to a corner, showing how smart you are, ensuring you can dominate. So many questions have all that other junk.
Yes.
A genuine question is curious in its purest form. Curiosity is the craving for knowledge. I want to know what I'm missing. That's a genuine question. Perceptive. This is so cool. No one's ever asked me this before. By perceptive, I mean I am fully in your world. I am observing you. I am listening to you. I am not trying to explain you on my terms, which is, boy, we do that a lot. I did that as a journalist in my early days. Big mistake, really stupid. Can't understand somebody else on your own terms. People are mysteries, not puzzles. A puzzle, like think of a jigsaw puzzle. I just need to find the missing pieces. I know the shape. I might even know the shape of the piece. I just gotta go find the piece. People aren't like that. People are mysteries. You cannot solve a mystery from a distance. You've got to get close. And the second you find a piece, you realize the shape is totally not what you thought. And it's very annoying. And it's probably three-dimensional or, I don't know, there's multiverse going on. But a perceptive question is actually trying to learn outside the bounds of what you know. That's really hard, but I think that that's really important to do in the realm of the human, because we are so complex. One of the biggest mistakes we make is flattening each other, condescending to each other. You're not worthy. I don't know. What do you have to give? Nothing. You know, I've boiled people down into a statistic. I read this great thought piece, very confident, you know, had some statistics, and now I know why 70 million people made this choice. I don't have to ask them more questions. I don't talk to anybody. What? You know what I mean? Would that work the other way around? Like, is there anyone that I would say, yes, they're an expert on everything I believe? No. Like, why do we do that to each other? So a genuine, perceptive question, when somebody hears that, it's in the context of generous listening. It's in the context of being received. It's in the context of feeling like you matter. In that context, we're often more comfortable sharing our truth.
I love that later, related to this, when you're talking about assumptions, you say the biggest assumption that we can make is that we can solve the mystery from a distance. Yeah, and that's terrific. Okay, so Monica, if you are a lover of acronyms, you have come to the right place.
I do like them.
Because we love those here at Dartmouth.
Like probably too much. I like them too much. Maybe.
Well, it helps, right? Because when you're in the moment, it's hard sometimes to remember these tools. But trying to think about the causes of polarization, and one of the first acronyms you introduced is SOS.
Yep.
Okay, so let's make sure, not everyone here probably has read your book, just get everyone on the same page. SOS, sorting, othering, and siloing. We can talk a little bit about that, and then just to go back to the question that's hovering out there, something happened in the past 10 years around sorting, othering, and siloing that's gotten more intense.
Oh yeah, definitely. So sorting, othering, siloing. Before we go into each letter, the sum total effect is these are natural human dynamics and forces that convince us, that narrow our worldview while convincing us we see enough. So sorting, the natural human tendency to want to be around people who are like us. That's how we form friendships, communities of shared interests. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful, nothing wrong with it, right? Except for the fact that, well, you start spending less time with people who are different. Othering is the very natural human tendency to want to put distance between us and them. If there's any difference at all, some chilling research from 60s and 70s showed that the difference doesn't even have to be meaningful for you to kind of think like they're less than me. To give you a hilarious example, I noticed this happened to me when my daughter was in 2nd grade and there was another 2nd grade class. I'd meet parents outside at pickup, and if it was a parent of a kid in the other class, I don't know, I just kind of knocked them down a little bit in my mind. You know what I mean? It's ridiculous, and we do this all the time. It's a good thing I noticed, though. And then siloing. Siloing is the stories we tell and don't tell, the perversions to those stories that we're exposed to because of where we have sorted ourselves. So, thanks to the phone, boy, we have this miraculous device that we can stock full of everything that makes us, feel good and feel like a good use of our time, and we tend to put in the voices that affirm us and all of that. It's not like we're not exposed to the other side, we are, but it's usually through layers and layers of judgments. And that's when the other side's perspective comes to us. So the second part of that was something's happened, it's gotten more intense.
Yeah, it's that hovering question of sort of what's going on. Right. We started with the premise that polarization has gotten more intense since you wrote this book, and just sort of thinking about why.
Yeah.
What are there causes to this, and
yeah.
Do you see that we're just doing all three of these things more intensely, or is it one or the other, or what?
Yeah, all
Any
three
ideas?
definitely play a role, yes, for sure. So one is that absolutely blue zip codes are getting bluer, red zip codes are getting redder. Not that long ago, researchers would say, we think this is happening, but we don't really have the evidence. We have the evidence now. So that's been fairly recent and really acute, especially since things like the overturning of Roe v. Wade, things where, okay, now state to state, there's some real differences here, okay? So that's one. And there's so many consequences to the lack of spontaneous collisions with difference. Just serendipitous collisions that might just in small ways that you barely notice kind of check the places where you might be believing hyperbole, and you might be vilifying when you shouldn't, and you might be afraid when it's not really well-founded, and that just falls away, and it's a very difficult thing to miss. It's a very, very difficult thing to know that you're not getting. Othering has absolutely increased, and this makes me really sad, but it has. We, judging each other more, engaging each other less. There's no way this gets better as long as we're spinning apart. And that continues. That absolutely continues. And then siloing, you just have to look at what's happened to social media platforms in the last 2 years. When I was coming into social media, 2008, 9, we were talking about, this is like a public utility, Facebook and Twitter and all this. And now, especially since the election, there's more of a sense of, the owner of this platform is clearly for this side, and the owner of that platform is over here, and this platform is more libertarian, and that. And boy, we've even got like siloed gardens of these platforms. And so there's even fewer spaces where, everybody actually is and is reachable. So we're siloing even more in digital spaces, not to mention the actual news media, my goodness. The trust has not gotten a whole heck of a lot better. There are green shoots, which we can get to. There are.
Yes, we're going to get there.
But to answer your question, yeah, it's not great.
So, and we're going to come out of the not great, but I want to explore this a little bit more.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, we will come back to hope. So one thing that got my attention, because one of the things we've talked about in the Dialogue Project is the role that emotion plays in really stifling dialogue. Once emotions start to flare, people can shut down. And there were some things that really caught my attention on siloing. I had never thought of it that way. You wrote, the more groups hang out with each other, they fuel and amplify their outrage. Okay, but this one, and people who are more empathetic are more likely to be angry at the other side. That was kind of counterintuitive to me, Tell us about that.
Yeah, there's some really interesting research about, empathy is not the solution by itself. Because if you have a lot of empathy and that is combined with the very natural effects of siloing and sorting and othering, then you'll end up getting so connected to the people that you feel are good and righteous that you'll actually, there's studies that you'll feel more pleasure when the other side suffers. That comes from empathy too, because you're doing the us versus them, So don't think that empathy by itself is enough. It's really not. That can amplify good feelings. It can boost a sense of belonging, but at whose expense?
And it seems like, we've got to guard against that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Maybe we can talk about possible tools. You're hanging out with your group, and you start to feel that. Mm-hmm. How do you say, oh, check in? Mm-hmm. Well, I'm doing that thing.
Yep.
Seems really important. So that sort of brings me, getting sort of into, we got to, we've painted a picture. We got to get into some solutions and some tools here. And so you say that bridging is the answer to the SOS. Mm-hmm. And one thing that's interesting is that you write, she has a lifelong love affair with bridging conversations. But the most important thing about bridges is not to cross them, but to keep them. Yes. Which sounds completely counterintuitive because presumably we build physical bridges so that we can cross them to get to another location. So let's try to understand what your meaning is here. I think, let me just repeat that for those of you who might not have read the book. The most important thing about bridges is not to cross them, but to keep them. And there's a lot in the book about building these bridges, but not to cross them. So let's learn about that.
Right. So, the way I think of it, bridges are all around us already. Everywhere you have a relationship, everywhere that you can meet somebody as they are and have an exchange where you can learn from each other, like there's a bridge there. And what's been happening is people are breaking and burning bridges because they're afraid of how it reflects on themselves. Or sometimes, in extreme cases, there's abuse, there's trauma, absolutely. But a lot of times it is sort of an associative thing. And sometimes people, will say, okay, I have this relationship with Uncle Bob, and I really can't stand, Uncle Bob's perspective on COVID, whether he's gung-ho for the vaccine or he can't stand it, whatever it is. We're going to go talk to Uncle Bob. And when we go talk to Uncle Bob, we're going to be like, hey, Uncle Bob, we need to have a conversation. And we're going to ask these questions, right? And I've got an hour, and I better get satisfactory answers. I'm crossing this bridge. I'm doing my part, right? They're not giving me satisfactory answers. They're just confusing me even more. Now they're getting angry. Well, now I'm getting more angry. And, and then you walk away going, well, I talked to Uncle Bob, and that didn't work. I'm not going to talk to Uncle Bob again. He's not invited to Thanksgiving dinner. It's done. We're done. So I hear a lot from folks sort of, hey, Monica, I tried bridging. I tried, connecting and seeing eye to eye and all of that, and it didn't work, and so that's it. We're done with that bridge, and I'm going to take, the real thing is I'm going to take a step now to burn it. I'm going to take a step to push away. I'm going to take a step to communicate some kind of finality that can, like you won't think of it that way, that you're hurting them. You'll think of it as they've hurt me, and so I need to push. But either way, you're hurting each other, and either way, there's a burned bridge, and that's why the most important thing to do with a bridge is not to cross it, it's to keep it. Because, look, we can't control other people. We can't. Sometimes Uncle Bob's not ready for that conversation right now. Sometimes you're the one who's not ready for the conversation. You just don't know it yet. And you're coming in thinking you're curious, but you're actually, that's not open-minded curiosity at all. That is hostility and aggression. But if you feel righteous, it's hard to tell the difference. So sometimes people aren't ready. And the thing that happens is, if you really do burn that bridge, could it be that you were the only person in Uncle Bob's life that had this other perspective where the two of you could connect and learn, and he could see something a different way, and you could see something a different way I think there's somebody very close to me who disagrees with me on vaccines, hasn't vaccinated her child. I love her very deeply. And, you know, there's a sense like we've had the conversation and I want to have more conversation, but I can kind of tell like we're not getting anywhere with this. We're going to let that one kind of rest and be there. And I never know. I never know when I might be able to talk about that. But for now, we're just going to be in the relationship that we are, in the friendship that we have.
Thank you. So that sort of brings us, you know, in terms of building these bridges, another acronym. Do you pronounce this? I actually pronounce this. I never thought of it that way. I pronounce it intuit.
Yeah, that's
Is that
how I do
you're-
it too.
okay.
We dropped the W. I have no excuse for it. But yes, intuit.
We get it. The intuit moments, okay?
It's a mouthful otherwise.
And so there's a lot about tools to get to these intuit moments, but I just want to ask you, it's like, why is it important to have these moments? What's the purpose of getting there? Why do we want to get to an intuit moment?
Because it's really fun. I'm not supposed to say that. This is the political divide. It's supposed to be dour and severe and gross and terrible, but you know what? It's fun. It can be fun to learn and discover things about other people and discover what you don't know. So, okay, now that I've got that out of the way, sometimes it's actually enjoyable. I never thought of it that way. Moments are the reward of a curious conversation. A curious conversation, you know, it's like, again, if curiosity is about finding out what you're missing, learning something you don't know, gaining knowledge you didn't already have, then probably the way to do that is to talk to people or expose yourself to some sort of context that is unfamiliar to you. And so when you're in that, woo! I mean, it's awesome. It's like, who is it? Michel de Montaigne, I quoted him. I don't quote a lot of dead French philosophers, but I quoted this one. And it's that our brains rub and polish against each other. You know, and that's what I think about, like the friction of disagreement or of different experiences. Like, what is it like? What is that? And I'm uncomfortable, but sure, sharpen me. Like, let's sharpen each other. Let's go. And it can be so fun. And I've lost my train of thought. Where were we?
We were talking about why is it so important to get to these
Yeah,
intuit moments? And you said they're fun.
They're fun.
And?
They're fun. Yeah, they really are the reward. It's when you think or say in the course of a conversation, I never thought of it that way. It's a sign that a perspective, an insight has crossed that mysterious chasm between someone else and you. Kaboom! You know, as a result of that connection that you dared to make. Kaboom! I never thought of it that way. Something in you is more complicated. A seed has been planted. And the fun thing is that you don't know what's going to happen to that seed. That seed could get dug out the next day. That seed could grow and grow and grow and, like, unbeknownst to you, result in your changing your mind in 15 years about something tremendous. And I tell some stories in the book about that. There was one time where, recording the podcast, my great friend April Lawson, who's at Braver Angels, we had a really intense conversation about abortion. And she had asked a question in the course of the recording in that conversation that really stuck with me. And I was driving like 3 days later, and I had to pull over because I realized, not that I changed my mind on abortion, but I had changed my mind about one aspect of it based on her question. And I was so overcome that I actually called her. And I told her, like, hey, I just want you to know that question you asked in that podcast, like, I realized, you know, that this thing that I couldn't quite resolve, it's this. Like, this is where I am. And she and I ended up, like, crying. She's like, no one's ever called to tell me that something I said to them ended up changing them. I was like, yeah, I know, this is so cool. I never thought of it that way. Sometimes it doesn't happen in the course of a conversation, especially because we are kind of guarded. There's a sort of performance that's always a little bit there when we're just talking with somebody else. But if something sticks with you, you know, you're in the shower, you're walking your dog, you're still thinking about it, wow. Like, that's so cool. I just find that that's the way we grow together.
That's it, I think. That last piece, grow together, because I think if you're approaching a conversation with a goal of convincing someone that you're right, that's very different than approaching it with, I'm trying to learn something. I would love to have one of these moments where you say something that I never thought of it that way. And I think if we just come at the conversation with a different approach, we're probably going to have some better outcomes in terms of our own personal growth and our shared humanity, really, which is what it's about. Okay, so friction. Did you read my questions beforehand?
No, I promise you. I told her I never want to see questions ahead of time.
Not only did she tell me that, but she said there were no questions off the table.
Right.
So, because when we get to the Q&A, that might be important for you.
Good.
So, friction. Now we have another acronym. loop.
Oh, yeah.
Listen, observe, offer, pull. So now we're getting into a little bit of the tools here. We talk a lot about listening as part of the dialogue project. Listening doesn't mean waiting your turn quietly to blast your opinion, or thinking about your next move. I'd like to hear sort of your perspective on listen, observe, offer, pull.
Yeah.
When we're in the moment, it's so hard
It is.
to remember this. So acronyms are good.
It really is. And it's impossible to get it all perfectly right. Like, people assume I'm some kind of Zen master of curiosity. Like, you should see my disagreements. This is not about 100% compliance to. Listening ultimately for me is about showing people they matter. Because that's the question we all have. When I talk to somebody else, and especially if there's some deep suspicion, or even not that deep, just shallow, do I matter to this person? Does this person care about me even a little, like enough for me to be here? Do they see me? Do I figure into that? Are they capable of that? We're always asking that. So listening is a state of reception. I often think we talk about freedom of expression, and I kind of wish we talked about freedom of reception. Like wouldn't it be nice if we thought about that just as much? Observe. Observe is sort of a corollary to listening. It's not just the words. It's certainly not just the words. Are people shrinking back? Are they looking tight? Are they looking broad and expansive? Did they smile a lot at that one example? Is there something to dig into there where there's a lot of meaning and connection that can come out of it? Is that their angry face? My angry face is, like, if I stop talking, watch out. Like, different people have their own languages. So observe that and take that as data, for the conversation you want to have and the ways you want to connect. Offer. Offer is my way of talking about talk. Like, speak, say your piece. And the concept here is that a conversation often goes better if, on some level, it's not I shoot you a thought and you shoot me a thought and I shoot you a thought and you shoot me a thought, but rather there's a thing that we're kind of like exploring together, and you put meaning into it and then I put meaning into it. And it's like a, little cauldron. We're just kind of looking at it. And so offer is, let me offer this. Let me offer this experience, this perspective. Let me offer this way that this makes me feel. And then we look at it there, not in each other's eyes accusingly, right? And then pull is my way of saying, like, what questions are ultimately there for. Questions are a way of saying, this is what I'm not, this is what I don't have that I invite you to share with me. But you don't always pull with a question. Sometimes you pull with really good silence. I can't tell you how many times, in an interview, man, you get somebody going, I don't have to ask any more questions. This person's on a roll, And they just look at me and they look at do I look interested? Do I look a little, And then, all I have to go is, and they'll go, oh, what I mean is, right? So pull with a gesture, pull however you'd like, but if you do that loop, over and over again, you build the conversation that has traction, which means, you're finding purchase with each other, which means you can climb higher. Think of like a high alpine environment with little oxygen. You have to kind of be able to acclimatize to each other, and you have to make sure that it's okay up this high with you. And to do that, you have to be demonstrating, I'm really listening. I'm really receiving. And maybe you're really receiving me. And so we can go higher.
Another way that you talk about the loop, which I also found really helpful, is, it's not an acronym, but you talk about reach, grip, and balance.
Yeah.
And so you were just saying go higher, and I think you used a climbing metaphor. Yes. And I actually found that really helpful to think about, reach, grip, balance, because you might, and just trying to think about that metaphor in a conversation where you're reaching out, you're trying to find something to hold on to get some traction, but you might lose sometimes. Like, what do we do when we feel that we're starting to lose balance a little bit?
Exactly, right. So those three things are really important, because you may be reaching, like, hey, can I talk to you about abortion? You may be, looking for your grip. Just, did I understand this right? What did you mean by that? or demonstrating that I've listened to you. And balance is kind of about, look, like this is risky territory. Did something I say just come off wrong? Oh, no. Sorry, that came off wrong. Hang on, right? These are the things that we can do in person really well. So your question was, what can you do to keep balance?
Well, it's during the conversation when you feel, I'm losing balance, sort of, or I've lost grip, or what are some of the ways that we can get that back?
A lot of it is sort of check yourself. And look, there is no formula. That's one of the challenges of this whole space and like the tips and techniques. It's like, guys, this is humanity, The most important language is the one that the other person speaks. Gesturally and vocally, just tune into each other's language. It's a new job every time.
Yes.
You don't know what that person's day was like. What was your day like? You are dealing with a human being in a moment that has never existed before and will never exist again. This interaction that you have is as unique as a fingerprint. There is no script, so I just want to say that. Check yourself. In some cases, for example, like I'll just speak about me. Sometimes I go on for too long. I do. I go on for too long. And I'm losing my grip because it's not reciprocal anymore. And I need to make sure that person not just has a turn, but that I'm really putting myself in their world, not just so eager to get them into mine. So that's one. Things like language. Language can be kind of landmines a little bit. There are so many charged terms in our politics. The longer that we're doing that spin away vicious cycle thing, the more that we're speaking different languages. And then a lot of people choose to put a lot of moral stock, in the words that people do and don't use, right? So, undocumented immigrant versus illegal. There's a lot that, if you're liberal like me, there's a lot of folks who, if somebody uses the illegal as a noun for an immigrant, there's just a lot of assumptions about how they might think about immigration, what they might think about immigrants. That may not be true. So watch your language, slow down as you come to language. When you say, what do you mean when you say election integrity? What do you mean when you say voter suppression or voter rights? Different people have different key concerns about our elections and their trustworthiness. So which one are you? How we name and frame issues is just so important. And we don't realize that when we give an issue a name that is contentious, and we offer that issue to somebody else, and we ask them a question with that name, we've already communicated that we expect them to fit in that box. Anyway, and so that's another one. Just, can you get a kind of ambient awareness of language and how it might really differ? Like, what do you mean by that? Tell me why that's a term that captures what matters about this issue to you. For example, illegal. Like, I am liberal. I have more liberal views on immigration. Both my parents are Mexican immigrants and are very conservative on immigration policy. And so they don't personally get offended by the term illegal. They think that it makes a lot of sense. This is about people breaking the laws of the United States in order to enter the United States. They put the legality as a high value, the secure borders as a high value. I tend to think about things more, from a value of sort of benevolence, that, where security is not as important. And I'm thinking about the welfare of the person, which isn't to say that my parents don't also care about the welfare of the people. They are the people. You know what I mean? It's just good to check those things.
I'm glad you said value, because this was also a section in the book that got my attention a lot. So you mentioned Schwartz's theory of human values.
Yeah.
And you say that, the important thing here is not which values each of us holds, but their relative order.
Exactly.
Which I thought was so interesting. So, that just because people disagree, it doesn't mean that they have different values, but they might order them differently. And you mentioned a little bit there about your parents maybe have a different value on certain things. And so I just sort of want to unpack that a little bit for everyone here, because I think that is so interesting.
I still think about it. I think there's a lot of richness to this whole idea, and I have no final answers on any of this. Like, an obsession is something you don't stop learning about. Like, I'm still really digging into this. But Schwartz's theory of human values, it's a popular theory. It's not the only one, but it offers a lot of, I think, wisdom to this. So a lot of times people will say, I can't talk to people who believe that or who are on that side because they don't share my values, right? And so what is actually meant by that is rarely discussed. What do we mean by that? What the heck is a value anyway? And so in my research of this, I've become somewhat like compelled by the idea that actually we all share our values. We just stack them we rank them in a different order for different issues. So a fun example is, the value of self-determination is a universal human value. Go anywhere in the world, you will find the value of self-determination. I ought to be able to control something about my life and all of that. So in the case of abortion, the left puts self-determination really high when it says, government can't tell me what to do with my body. And on the right, during COVID, the right put self-determination very high when it said, the government can't tell me what to inject into my body or dangle my job, based on that very personal choice. Yep. So, yeah, you'll see it, and it's not that, and a lot of times people will use our misunderstanding of values against us. I often talk about this meme that I saw years ago. And you know how you scroll through social media and it's just kind of unconscious and you do it really quickly and little, half a second on this post and that post and all this stuff starts to build up in your head you're not even conscious of. And so I saw a meme that said, I choose the second grader over the Second Amendment. I choose the second grader over the Second Amendment. So notice some things. Notice the rhetorical symmetry. Powerful, right? It went right into my skull. And when it went into my skull, it immediately triggered good feeling. I am a good person and I'm on the right political side on guns because I don't want children to die. Also, the opponents on guns do. Whoa! What? What? Just this idea that they don't share our values becomes so easily manipulated to justify utter bullshit about what our debates are really about. Folks who have the Second Amendment, are very concerned about it, are not unconcerned about the safety of second graders. Where did we get that idea? How did that burrow its way into my skull without my brain turning on? And it's all these stupid tricks and tools that we use, and it's really sad. It's really, really awful. I really hate it. But the fertile ground is the belief, the fact that we can even believe that people on the other side don't love safety, don't love freedom, don't love self-determination. Come on. Come on. Yeah. It doesn't make sense. We all share these values.
Yeah, it's almost a little bit of an aside about values, but I was thinking about institutions. Institutions have values. We hear about the attack on higher ed, or people don't have faith in institutions anymore. And I'm just thinking about, is it that people at least perceive, maybe it's real, that the order of values for an institution they no longer share?
Yeah.
Do you think that's...
Yeah. The dichotomy between institutions and individuals is fascinating to me because there is some overlap. Institutions are made up of people. They're at least shepherded by people. And so, yes, there's clearly a lack of faith in institutions. There's clearly a lack of trust in institutions. And I think it's ultimately kind of this deep-seated lack of trust in the people running the institutions that then, converts into this other thing. But yes, it makes people very wary when they're told, journalism is the fourth estate. We're here to inform you. Why don't you trust us? You should trust us. You're a bad person for not trusting us. And they go, hang on, I've been living here and, I see these journalists miss a bunch of things that are true to me. I've seen them talk about things in a language that doesn't seem to see it the way I see it. And I see how that lines up politically. I also, it's all these ways that they're like, no, I don't buy it anymore. I don't buy it.
Yeah.
And so, but institutions have a lot of calcification at their core, a lot of structures that are very solid. And so it's very easy for the people in institutions to be like, nothing's wrong with us. It's just all of you people. you people don't like truth anymore. I don't know what happened. And that's, that's kind of the thing with journalism right now. It's very difficult for journalists who have worked so hard for so long to open ourselves up to the fact that we have earned some of this distrust.
So I'm flipping my pages because that refers back to another quote that I think is related to this part of our conversation, which is, misinformation isn't the product of a culture that doesn't value truth. It's the product of a culture in which we've grown too afraid to turn to each other and hear it.
Right.
Everyone's probably thinking of Jack Nicholson, You Can't Handle the Truth.
Yeah, that's right. It's a great movie, oh my God.
So, I mean, I think that's really interesting, thinking about truth or truthiness. And so you just, thinking about some of the techniques now that we've heard about, and, maybe the answer is we're not ready to have that conversation, but a question that we often get is sort of, how do I engage in a conversation with someone who's just dead wrong?
Right.
They think the earth is flat and it's not, and am I really supposed to go approach them because I just really want to have an intuit moment? How do I approach that with curiosity, or do we just say, yeah, we're not going to have a conversation? But how, and this, as you said, in this happens in family situations, et cetera. I'm a professor in biology. We've had discussions, students who maybe are from backgrounds where they were told, evolution's not a thing, and so now they're going home for Thanksgiving, and they're thinking about what they've learned. They're wrestling with compatibility around, religion and their religious beliefs and, what they've been learning, and they're going to go home and have a conversation.
Yeah.
And so we've been talking, Christy did a great workshop before Thanksgiving with some students about how do you go home and have those conversations? The students had maybe an intuit moment here, now they're going to go home and somebody's just dead set in their beliefs.
Yeah.
What can we tell our students about how to approach those conversations?
This is so fascinating because there's a lot to unpack here. And maybe one of the things is, what is your objective? So if you are in a conversation and you hear somebody say something you believe is just patently false, a lot of times it doesn't bother you that much, right? Like, somebody loves that movie that I think is terrible. Like, fine, just their opinion. And I think it's wrong, but but then somebody says something that just seems wrong. It's not usually just the wrongness, just the falseness of it that bothers us. It's the fact that we put consequences to that falseness, right?
Yes.
And it gives us a kind of obligation, a sense of responsibility. In some cases, it goes deeper than that. If identity is in play, then it's a sense of threat. It's a sense of non-acceptance or worse, in which case, you both want to come in and get the hell away, and you're fighting that battle. But either way, you're thinking that person is danger, 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 right? So think about that, because one of the things that makes this quite difficult is when you get it in your head, until that person changes, I can't be okay. Because once an idea kind of takes center stage in your head, it can really move everything else out of the way, And this is how, just disasters can happen at family gatherings. Just, it suddenly becomes so important, and somebody thinks, I can't be okay until they change. And so then we have to, so now we talked about that. Now we have to deal with the real goal, I think, when we're calm and cool, is persuasion. If we really believe that that's wrong and I've got the truth, then what I want is to persuade that other person. Okay, so now let's think practically about that. Because you cannot persuade by being hostile. You cannot persuade by shaming. And you may not think that you are condescending in the way that you are, I just want to correct you, Uncle Bob. But you might come off really condescending. And a lot of times, and research has shown this, there's the backlash effect. And people will try to correct people, but in ways that just, honestly, drip with contempt.
Yeah.
And guess what? You are going to undermine your goal. completely. Now, what sucks is that what I believe the best thing to do is the one that's the least comfortable, which is, okay, if this matters to me, does it matter enough to me to take the time to receive and to listen to this person, to understand the meaning that they have put and the concerns that they have underneath this belief in what I view to be a falsehood? Because here's the thing that's also really annoying. Facts don't matter as much as perceptions. Facts don't matter as much as interpretations. It's just true. It's just true. It sucks, but it's true. You can't just say a fact and expect it to have all this power. That's not the way it works. Plus, and we have to be humble about this, it's like you go to one side and you go to the other, and I'll tell you, a lot of people call opinions facts. A lot of people do. It's conflated all the time. And what we do is we pin the label fact on an opinion that we believe to be so right that we cannot accept that it's debatable. We cannot accept that there's anything more to learn. The conversation is done. Everyone who's still having this conversation is a deviant who is hurting the world. But I find the opposite to also be true. That, you're also kind of denying the reality of the doubt that's out there, the reality of the debate that's out there. You are choosing to deny the reality of that contentious issue. That's on you. That comes with risks. It's hard to open ourselves up. Really hard. And I don't, in a lot of cases where people see like a mistruth and kind of like use that to sort of blanket condemn the entire other side of something, you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There are a lot of concerns there that are true and human and beautiful, and we need to integrate into a better understanding of our democracy.
Yeah. Well, and this point about when you feel endangered by someone who you think, that was totally played out during COVID, right? If you don't get the vaccine, you are endangering me. If you don't wear a mask, you are endangering me. So, I want to just ask one more question before we open it up to the audience. Like other institutions, Dartmouth has had protest in the past year or so. Protests are a common thing on college campuses, activism. But when all of this was happening, Christy and I in particular heard, where's dialogue? Dialogue is dead, so much for dialogue, which was, disappointing, and I didn't agree with it. But my question for you is, where do you think there is an intersection, if there is one, between activism and fearlessly curious conversations?
Yes, such an important question. I do think that in some corners of the bridging space, the thing is allowed to kind of fester, this idea that we really just need the conversations and that's it. That's all we need. We just need understanding and that's it. But we know that's not the case. We know that's not the case. All this understanding has a purpose, and the purpose is, can we figure out how to act together? Think differently, but act together. There's this great scholar named Yuval Levin, and for him, that's the definition of unity. It's not agreement to act, it's acting despite disagreement. It's finding that. I recently read this beautiful just story about the founding and when the Constitutional Congress was trying to figure out how to put this government together. And there were these like knockout dragon fights, arguments about we need, something like a Senate where there's states are equally represented. No, we need a representative legislative body, like the House of Representatives is now, where it's like based on population. Rah, 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 rah. And finally just somebody stood up and be like, can we just have both? Oh, maybe. Yeah, maybe we can have both. And now I've lost my train of thought again. Can you tell me where we were?
Activism.
Yes.
And dialogue.
Right.
Conversation.
So the dialogue without activism, it can be a navel-gazing exercise, an intellectual, let me sound smart, let me sharpen my own understanding for myself. Activism without dialogue is reckless, uninformed, and doomed to fail. Doomed to fail. Activism without dialogue is doomed to fail. I think a lot of activists, and look, so activism is absolutely a beautiful and cherished part of our democracy and always will be. We need it, it's awesome. But when activists start to get into such binary modes of thinking that they stop checking in with their opponents on a primary source level, what's actually going on over there, then the movement can't move. It becomes a performance of symbolic righteousness. It starts to burrow itself into a hole, and it may feel really good when you're getting all the likes on, TikTok or whatever, but what are you actually doing? Probably not persuading anyone who needs to be persuaded, because you don't even understand where the disagreement actually lives. Like back to that second grader Second Amendment thing, you start to believe too much in your flat slogans on that poster. Look, they serve a purpose. We need the sound bites. I'm a journalist. We need the sound bites for things to carry. We don't have all day. We need that. I get it. But if you start to believe that that's it, that's a problem. That's never it. Whatever's on that poster is never the whole story. So there better be some people in your movement who, and please, do this behind the scenes. Don't tell anyone you're doing it. If that's important to you, that's fine. The civil rights movement, so many behind the scenes conversations. People would be like, oh my God, they actually talked? Yes, they did. They talked a lot, actually. I thought they were enemies. It looked like that on the cameras, and they had to look that way. They had to be, this person is ruining everything. But they would call that person that night and talk. They have to do that for their side to gain credibility that they're representing their side. It's this whole thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, if you're not checking in a climate like this with sorting, othering, and siloing, whatever change you managed to make probably came through something kind of like bullying. And the second power changes hands, it will be undone.
Wow, there is so much in what you just said, and I could go on, but in fairness, I think that's a perfect moment to open it up to the audience to ask some questions.
We've got
Are we?
got folks with microphones, and so if you can just wait for a microphone to come to you, but I don't see the people who are supposed to have the microphones. So let's first, I got you, so just give me a second.
Oh, I guess we don't have an extra one, do we?
We don't.
Right.
That was great.
That was fun.
That was great.
Oh, okay.
Hey, there's two.
Okay.
I said he was first, so.
Okay.
Thank
All right,
you.
there you are. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, Doug Teschner from West Lebanon, and I'm New England Regional Leader for Braver Angels, which is a very fancy title for a volunteer. Braver Angels is driven by volunteers. There's a number of us here. And if what you're hearing today is resonating with you, we want you. I've been reaching out to the college. We have a college debate program that we'd love to bring to the college. We have a workshop coming up in Thetford on March 16th for other people. I mean, I got into this because I worry about what's going to be the future of this country for my grandchildren. And this conversation is so important, and thank you. This is really a thank you to the college and to my friend Moni.
Thank you, Doug. And I gotta throw a shout out to Doug. Doug has done extraordinary things in places that people think it's impossible. Workshops with the entire New Hampshire state legislature, Democrats and Republicans, about how to listen better across the political divide. It's remarkable. Beth Mallow as well, just all the Braver Angels. This is possible. What you see on TV is not all there is. And it's really, really cool. So thanks, Doug.
Hi. I'm curious how you channel curiosity when you feel like you are, because of what you are, what you represent is under attack. For example, as a woman, it is hard in some situations right now. I'm trying to make sure I do facts, not opinion.
You do you, and we can work with it.
Yeah, it is my impression that females are not being valued at the same level as males by certain people in the world right now. And so I'm curious how you stay curious when you feel like the person doesn't value you when they're talking to you.
Well, the first thing I do is try to get my radar up to notice when those fears appear in my head. So that's a belief. This person doesn't value me. This person doesn't value women. And then I try, because this is where curiosity across the political divide is ultimately born, is when we turn our assumptions into questions. Some of our assumptions are correct. The problem is that our assumptions are answers to questions we never asked that we choose to believe. Okay, so I have this belief, I have this sense that this person doesn't value women. And so a way to turn on curiosity is to go, instead of let that sit there, this person doesn't value women, this person doesn't value women, this person doesn't value women, to go, does this person value women? And then maybe, in the case of that one, like, does this person value me? And we're right back to that question about, do I matter? We're right back to that question, that foundational one. So the lovely thing about one-to-one conversations, because everything gets harder by degrees, the less contained a conversation is. So if you're in a big group, really tough to be heard, and be seen. But if you're just one-on-one and there's nobody else listening, it's an amazing opportunity to connect to the individual that is there beyond whatever belief is taking center stage for you about them. This is also the context where persuasion is most possible. So if they do have a sense that they value women less, you would want them to value women more by the end of your conversation. Maybe you would think. It certainly would be in your interest, right? So in that case, well, sometimes the best way to argue against people who think that that people like you are not as worthy and shouldn't exist, to take the extreme version, is to continue to exist in their presence. Just, I'm here. I'm here and I matter to me. And let me show you that in the way I hold myself up. Let me show you that in the courage I have to respect you utterly. Despite what you're saying now, I have my integrity. I'm not going to let whatever attitude might be there affect my self-conception. And maybe that might be enough, if that actually lives in that person's heart, to make them question their belief that women aren't as valued. So again, this takes courage, this takes patience. This is not for everybody in every moment. But if you find yourself in that moment, because again, like every conversation, unique as a fingerprint, maybe not today, but maybe in a year, keep the bridge. You never know.
If we're going to slow down or reverse the trend of polarization in our society, it seems that it would be very important to teach these skills to the next generation of curious disagreement and engagement. Can you say a few words about the fellowship program that was mentioned at the beginning, that's being brought to Dartmouth, and what can be done to encourage Dartmouth students to participate?
Yeah, I think Christy would probably have most. I will say, just to shout out, the fellowship program is started by Shira Hoffer at the the Institute for Multipartisan Education. Shira is a Harvard undergraduate senior who is executive directing this program. So it's students training students, and it's awesome. So take it away, Christy.
Yeah. Shira is also a Hanover native. So grown right here at home. The fellowship program is Dartmouth and Elon University will be the first that are taking part in this. We're looking for 10 student leaders from each institution who will receive training, who will work within the Dartmouth cohort and then together with the Elon cohort to come up with projects for their organization. So they'll receive this training, they'll come back to the organization that they lead, and they will work on a 9-month project to bring institute ways of speaking across divides, bridging those gaps in a way that then will have lasting impact for the future leaders. So looking towards those student leaders to plant those seeds and to bring that to our student organizations. So we're really excited about it. Applications open till the end of March.
So after the presidential election, I was having a Zoom with my cousins, and I said something, and I said, oh, actually, I don't know how any of you voted. And my cousin Wade said, I voted for Trump and proud of it. And I was curious. That's not who I voted for. And I said, oh, well, what are your main reasons? And he said, because of the economy, because Democrats lie, and because Republicans are the party of the people, where Democrats used to be the party of the people, but Republicans are the party of the people. And I just couldn't stay curious with all that. And I just would love to know, like, what I could have done.
Can you say a little more? How do you know that you couldn't stay curious? Unpack that for me.
I hadn't read your book yet.
No. Sorry. I mean, in that situation, what does it mean that you couldn't stay curious after that? Like, what happened?
I thought the exact opposite of what he thought. And I wasn't sure where to go next, so I just changed the subject on this Zoom with my cousins.
Of course. And, look, like, more power to you. We're not always ready. You know what I mean? It's okay. And, it doesn't sound like your cousin has been disowned or anything.
I didn't break the bridge.
Right. So maybe it's the best conversation is the one that you can have more of later, right? So there's always ways to keep going. Yeah. All right. It sounds like it was an emotional reaction because you disagreed so much, and I'm guessing here, but also there was an emotional tag to that disagreement. Like, how was there confoundedness, confusion? Like, how could you think that?
We thought exactly the opposite.
Exactly the opposite.
On all three ways.
Right. So that is really tough. And actually, I did a workshop earlier today where we got hands-on with curiosity, and one of the participants ended up in the workshop exercises like sitting in a pair with somebody with whom she really disagreed, and she described it as being like, it was only 6 minutes, and she's like, I was getting a headache by the end of it. It can be a sensation. The call, the challenge of curiosity is how long can you stay in a non-judgmental place of reception? So the next thing would have been to ask another question. And sometimes when you're really angry or you're really confused or kind of stunned, those are not going to come very easily. And so I'll give you the cheat. The cheat is the question of elaboration. Tell me more. It's not even a question, but it is. It's the ultimate pull. Tell me more about that. Like, you're so shell-shocked you can't articulate a question, but in that moment you feel like maybe I can stay in the arena. I can stay in the discomfort a little longer. Can you tell me more about that? That's it. And then the work is abide. They're real perspectives. Just abide. They exist anyway. She believes what she believes, whether she tells you or not. So the reality of it is non-negotiable. Can you abide it? And for how long? And it only takes 2, 3, 4 minutes maybe of receiving someone else's true perspective at a point of elaboration and with non-judgmental listening for you to then be able to do the amazing thing that Braver Angels teaches called the pivot. And the pivot is, okay, I've heard you, now can you hear me? Because I want to say something. At Braver Angels, we believe in speaking fully, freely, and without fear. And often what allows space to come around you is for you to offer the space first as a gift to someone else. You've given that gift to your cousin, and at the end of something she says, if there's room for that, you can say, okay, so first you paraphrase, you've demonstrated that you understand something she said. Okay, so I heard you say that, that you think you see Democrats lying because of this and that thing that you observed. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, thank you for that. I see that very differently. Can I tell you about that? Can I tell you what I mean? And that question of permission is actually important because it's not so much that you're asking permission and you're putting the power in their hands for you to speak. No, don't think of it that way. What you're doing is securing buy-in. They are telling themselves, I can listen to her. And once they've made that little pledge by telling you, yeah, sure, they'll listen to you. So then you tell them why, to you, the Democratic Party is still the party of the people for this one reason. And hopefully that reason that you choose to give is informed by whatever you heard from her. You've heard where something is just like, not working out for her with that theory. And so you now know what she's worried about. Okay, now you give your perspective, and maybe it's an angle that maybe she can receive, maybe complicates her certainty about that. I don't know. But use the pivot. And the pivot is a nice reward, but you really do need to listen to someone else first.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. This is building on this a little bit. But I've been thinking about how shaped by trauma and experience we are, and how most of the time we have responses, our bodies respond before our heads do. And
Totally.
so I'm wondering about how we practice this, and when you are in a conversation, even if you've practiced it, the other person hasn't necessarily. So I'm curious to hear how effective this has actually been, not,
Right.
in reality, because it sounds great and I totally believe it. But I know for myself, as somebody who is an activist and has seen the limits of activism in the way you described exactly, I found myself totally talking at somebody a few days ago. I was horrified afterwards. But I was so mad at what they were saying, even though I knew, like, this is exactly what I don't want to be doing. And I was hijacked. So, yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up. That is so relatable. We all find ourselves in that place that we regret what we say later. Oh my gosh. In the heat of the moment, right? It's one thing to be talking in this sort of like calm, cool auditorium and, here's the ideals, but in the heat of the moment, that's tough. Now, you mentioned trauma. I often talk about how certainty is the arch villain of curiosity, because if you think you know, you won't think to ask. Just that simple. But fear is a huge, foil to curiosity as well, because you cannot wonder about something you think is out to get you. If you're being chased by a bear, you're not like, how fuzzy is the bear? You're running away. That's it. That's all there is to it. And also, our brains have developed this superpower. Fear is a superpower. We are all the descendants of people who ran away from the bear. And what fear does, it hijacks, but for our own good, right? It hijacks us. It takes the adrenaline and puts it onto this and that, and it gives us all these extra strength or whatever. We become superheroes, here we go. But boy, oh boy, do we lose the ability to think. We lose the ability to be creative and to be collaborative when we are in that place. Now, the trauma responses, there's like reams of research on this, but fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Fawn is one we don't often think about. Fawn is when you're like, the wolf is baring his teeth, and you're like, nice doggy. No. It's still a trauma response. So one thing to know is that when you are in a trauma response, it's not a great time to be approaching a conversation across difference. When you are afraid and your brain is in that place, curiosity is really, really hard. Just physiologically, it's really hard. So then where does that leave you? I think it leaves you here. Don't try to have, if you are in that response for a certain issue, don't try to have a conversation with another person that's curious and challenging and humble. Have it with yourself. That's when you have to do self-inquiry. Where are your fears coming from? What is triggering that trauma response? You may be excavating some things in your own experience, and you may be putting those next to your goals, right? If you're an activist, well, I want to change the world, but this is happening. I don't want to behave this way. What do I do? And so I have found that people have gone through, again, it can be a long journey, all of this is. But there are some folks who can get there. It's pretty impressive. And again, it's not for everybody. It's not for everybody. And whatever experiences you've had that make you that angry, sometimes that's where you marshal your energy for your cause. Is you're up there telling that story, riling people up at the injustice of it all. And that's where you belong, and that's okay. Maybe there's somebody else who does more of the bridge building. Although, personally, I really hope that everyone can hold some room to inquire. But again, if you're only inquiring within yourself, sometimes that's good enough. Sometimes that's taking you another step toward curiosity. And that's plenty. That's good.
Making my way down. Sorry. That's okay. It's down the stairs. That's easy.
Thank you. I always learn something from you. This is fabulous. What a gift. I'm Beth Mallow. I have flyers on the Thetford event that Ginger and I are organizing afterward. Okay, so here's my question. I read the book. I read your book. I love your book. I feel like I can talk to just about anyone. The biggest challenge for me has been talking with people since the election, after the inauguration, who accuse me of normalizing anti-democratic behavior, or say, you know, how can we have these conversations right now? The house is burning down. How can we talk to people who are like such untruths and with everything that's going on? And I struggle because I feel like I need to teach them to be curious or be more curious myself about what they're going through. And I find myself angry that they think I'm doing kumbaya and all of that. And I'm curious if you've felt any of that as a bridge builder and how you manage it and relate to them.
That's a great question. And yeah, I get that all the time. There's a lot of reasons, many of which I can understand why all this bridge building thing does seem like kumbaya. It seems like twiddling your thumbs. It seems like not acting. It seems like wanting everyone to come to the middle, wanting everyone to be nice. That's not what it is, first of all, but it certainly can seem that way. And for folks who are on the left and really horrified at what's going on with the administration, then boy, this can seem like the wrong time, right? And so yes, the accusations can come. What I do if I am, just kind of casually with people is once I hear something like that, I am now here for them. I am now here for them. Because to me, anger and fear are emotions that need tending. And a lot of times, we miss this about curiosity, and I wish I'd written more about this in the book. Curiosity is a form of caring when done well. If somebody's anger is motivated by fear, motivated by a traumatic experience, it's an invitation, if there is trust there, to sit and be present with that person. And if they want to share to me. I'm here. What has this been feeling like for you? That makes sense. That sucks. Yeah, I get that. Like, I just, Beth, I know you and I are activists for bridging, right? And I have to set aside how convinced I am that this is what I want to convince everybody about. This is what I think is right, and I do. But I also understand that everyone's different, and the place where everyone is in their own journey is the place they need to be. And the people who are afraid to the point of being paralyzed have something to teach everyone, and also have this, we talk about like, I'm still processing that. Have things to process. And one of the ways that curiosity is caring and is almost like a gift is, when was the last time you were confronted with your own opinion? When was the last time that somebody asked you what you thought about something and helped you explore it for yourself? We don't do that with each other hardly ever, and it's awesome. It sharpens us. And so when I switch into that mode, I find that just through my non-judgmental inquiry, I can help someone be more confident about where they are and find whatever power they're looking for. Because a lot of times, look, if someone's talking to you and arguing with you, they're probably in the room with you in some context where they're a little bit curious about bridging, and they've just got some tension in them. So they need that tension worked out. Help them work it out. And if it gets to like they need to leave, let them leave. This isn't for everyone at every moment. So yeah, it's the same kind of humility as with anything else.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Did you have one?
Coming from the back.
Hi. I am curious about Braver Angels as an organization, because I have looked into its history a bit, and I know that it sort of pivoted, like the mission of the organization pivoted about 10 years ago after after Trump was first elected, am I right? And before that, it was more of a, not like partisan necessarily, but advocacy on specific issues. And so I'm curious about like how, I mean, I realized that you joined after that change happened, or I'm assuming that. But I am curious if you have seen any effect of having the organization change that way, and what lessons you think might have been carried over from that.
Yeah. So here's how I understand it. I just want to like align with you a little bit. So Braver Angels started at the 2016 election with a workshop that was right after that. It was started by our founder, one of our three co-founders, David Blankenhorn. David Blankenhorn went through this experience where he had been an advocate against same-sex marriage and fairly outspoken for years. And so he worked on that issue. I think it was like the Institute for Family Values or something like that. I forget, something like
American
that.
values.
Yes, thank you, Institute for American Values. And he went through this experience where he started talking to a lot of folks and learning about this issue from different angles and realized he'd changed his mind. He no longer thought that same-sex marriage was a problem. In fact, he kind of welcomed it and thought that that would, be better for everyone overall. And what he experienced was lots of shaming, lots of canceling, lots of what we do to each other when we dare to change our minds, when we've been leading the charge on something. It was actually part of what led to him wanting to join Bill Doherty, who's a marriage therapist, and David Lapp, who's just an extraordinary human being, in creating Braver Angels in 2016. So it wasn't one organization that changed its mission. It's David Blankenhorn had his own issue that he cared deeply about and made a change that showed him the dark side of disagreeing in America and led to his part of this. But did that get to your question?
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Okay, totally.
Thank you. We've talked about, and your book talks about the deep value of genuine curiosity in creating bridges and understanding each other so that we could actually reach agreements without having to agree on everything. I'm curious about this sounds like it's a question about scale, so that is at the interpersonal level or the intercommunity level. It's also presuming that we can have conversations, that we're always having conversations with people who have sincerely held beliefs. And I'm curious about how all of this advice and skills for creating dialogue and mutual understanding can be deployed or where they hit their limits when it's insincere actors increasingly monetizing their ability to throw inflammatory ideas into the world. The skills that we're talking about help us deal with people who accept those beliefs or are manipulated by those statements. But the generation of them is more and more cynical and not about sincerely held, differently prioritized values.
Yep.
And I'm wondering, when we get to the ground of why do you believe that, and the generator of a statement doesn't actually believe it.
Yeah, it's fairly gross.
What do we do?
I'm reminded of my former editor, Don Smith, who always said when I was complaining about something in the comments, never wrestle with a pig. You both get dirty and the pig likes it. Which is true. But how can you tell the pig from the non-pig? Because, the troll is trying to get dirty, is trying to get into that with you. And boy, they've gotten very good at just seeming like they're good faith and they're really getting into this. So one thing is there are spaces where these things thrive. There are. And those spaces are the performative spaces. The spaces where you can make a buck off of it. The spaces where you can get a bunch of clicks that you can monetize. These are social media spaces. These are media spaces. You will not find that in one-to-one conversations because there's no one to score points for. And so that's cool. Change the ratio. Don't be in the places those folks are. Amanda Ripley calls folks like this conflict entrepreneurs. She's not even talking just about trolls. She's talking about people who contribute to just the horrible, toxic disagreement industrial complex that is so excited when we get divided. So great for them. Because look, like, the cheapest emotion on which to make a buck is fear. I studied film, and so, fun fact, horror film is, yes, I'm seeing vigorous nods. Horror films are the easiest ones to make, the cheapest. You just need a little ketchup. And, fear just gets you going, And it's true, it just is. So we have to be so careful because it's so easy to manipulate us through our emotions. It is so easy. So yeah, I would say just avoid those spaces. And when you're there, and I don't know, I think sincerity and insincerity is in the eye of the beholder. I think it is also dangerous though. Like sometimes people anticipate insincerity when someone really is trying to be genuinely curious. And so sometimes you shut the door too soon. But anyway, I tend to stay away from certain spaces where that comes up. And really, I think what you're asking is an institutional question. How do we get those institutions to stop producing stuff that is gross and wrong and manipulative and making everything worse? And that's a big question I don't have all the answers to. I have a lot of guesses. The piece of it, right, because all activists have to pick their slice. The piece of the slice I'm working on is the grassroots, everyday people piece, because I think it's necessary. I don't think it's sufficient. I think we need institutional change as well. But I don't see how institutions like politicians and the media can change what they do unless they see people changing what they do. I think that that's important.
Great. Well, I think that's a wonderful place to stop our discussion today. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's so wonderful to feel like you're just a fly on the wall of this brilliant conversation. And I know that you both have given all of us so much to think about. Thank you for your wonderful questions, everyone. The Dialogue Project is thrilled to be in our second year of operating here at Dartmouth. If you are interested in more of our activities, please see our website, thedialogueproject.dartmouth.edu. Our next and final event for the winter term will be next Thursday, March 6th. Adam Grant, author and organizational psychologist, will be giving a public talk in Collis Common Ground at 12:30. We'd love to see you there. We'd also love for you to join us for a reception outside in the atrium. Grab a book. Monica will sign some books for you. And thank you so much for coming out on this dark, rainy evening.
Yay. Thanks, everyone.